All right, time for part two. Now that we have understood a little bit about his background, where he came from, his family tree, his education and military service, and again, some of these contradictions that we have come to know about MacArthur, let's spend a little bit of time now kind of investigating what these behaviors mean. What can we infer from some of these features that we know of MacArthur based off of personal accounts of those who knew him, quotes of those that knew him, his own writings, which we referenced for this project in depth, which were very illuminating, I would say. And so, given some of these particular traits that are so pronounced in this figure, uh, to me, I think that there is a good body of evidence to suggest, and I'm certainly not the first person to go here. There's been plenty of individuals who have analyzed this dialogue, these behaviors, this larger than life personality of MacArthur as being very much in line with what we know to be true of narcissistic personality disorder. And so, what I'd like to do with Joe now is for you to give us some insight and some evidence that aligns with some of these features that we know are dominant in narcissistic personality disorder. And this is the newest updated DSM-5 categories here and symptomology of this particular personality disorder, where there is a marked impairment in functioning and relationships because of these particular functioning and traits, and also how stable these traits and features are over time and across situations. And so I'd like to just start off with getting your input on some of the impairments for his personality and interpersonal function when it comes to his identity. So you mentioned before he's being raised with this notion and this very intense family history, coming from kings, coming from royalty, being raised under and in his father's shadow with all of his great military achievements, a mother who doted on him incessantly, wives who sound like they doted on him incessantly. So when it comes to his self-esteem and his regulation for his self-esteem, what do we know about his self-esteem? Is it safe to say that it was very much inflated?
Well, yes, uh, but in fairness, I mean, whose isn't, right? To some degree, uh,
Particularly in his case.
particularly in his case, because here you've had this expectation from others, and he internalized it. It was his expectation of himself
Right.
that he was going to achieve greatness.
So
Uh,
his self-appraisal was, I am great, I'm going to continue to
exactly.
be great.
And the problem with that is, as humans, we are subject to behaviors that are ungreat. Right, right.
Absolutely.
We've all done things and will do things that are not indicative of the person we want to be. And General MacArthur tended to either ignore those things, compartmentalize those things in his mind in such a way that they just didn't really exist for him.
Right.
Some examples here, you know, as we said, if you loved him, and you fed his ego, you fed his self esteem, you were close to him. If you did not feed that, you were pushed away. Um, he became married in 1922. He married a woman very much of the age. She was a divorcee, Louise Cromwell Brooks, and it was a whirlwind romance. It was Manchester, one of his biographers, called her the it girl, like the actress Clara Bow at the time, who was
Okay.
very popular. But she did not feed his self esteem always, and their marriage lasted for 7 years and ended in divorce. In his reminiscences, and as Jen mentioned, that you said it's very telling, and it's very telling for what he tells about himself and what he doesn't say about himself. So, at one obscure point in his reminiscences, his autobiography, he makes one sentence: "I entered into matrimony in 1922. It was not successful and ended in divorce in 1929." That's all he says about his marriage. Uh, And there was a whole lot more to it than that, as one could very well imagine. His mother, as we've said, was a dominant figure in his life. After the death of his father, she lived almost constantly with Douglas, except she did not attend his marriage to Miss Brooks. She did not want to have anything to do with that. After the divorce, she was back. He was back in her good graces. He made several trips back and forth to the Philippines, uh, several tours of duty. And in 1930, he came back to become the Army's chief of staff. Now, this is the pinnacle of a career. This is the person, the general in charge of the Army. And he moves into quarters in Fort Myer, and his mom moves in with him. Well, he also brought back from the Philippines, not on the same ship, on a following ship, a young, we're not exactly sure how young, there are conflicting records, a young Filipina actress, singer, who was essentially his lover, and he brought her back to Washington, D.C., set her up in Georgetown first, later in another hotel, and kept her as his mistress and
Wow.
gave her, she was fully equipped with a wardrobe of lingerie. And one day when she asked for him to buy her some street clothes so she could go out and do things, his response was, "Why should you ever need to leave the apartment?"
Wow. So to me, this is a big light bulb moment here that sheds some light on the propensity to perhaps have this disorder, because intimacy and how narcissists view intimacy is the relationships are superficial. They exist to serve the self-esteem regulation of the narcissist. And so there's not a lot of interest in, the genuine, health and well-being or relationship that the other person is experiencing there.
Right.
So and their personal standards, a narcissist's personal standards, are unreasonably high. And so if he's seeing himself as exceptional, and then to him there's an exception to these rules, he can have this relationship outside of marriage here.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's at this point, now this is after his divorce. So, but he hasn't met his future wife yet. So, uh, at one point, this is even more to your point, I think, she asks him, he's off being chief of staff of the Army somewhere. She sends him a letter and says, "My brother needs employment. I
Mm-hmm.
need a job for my brother." Now, keep in mind, this is the middle of the Great Depression.
Right.
Unemployment is around 25% in the United States, which is catastrophic. And General MacArthur rips a help wanted ad out of the newspaper, stuffs it in an envelope, and mails it back to her.
So this proves our point for empathy
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
A narcissist cannot recognize or identify others' feelings, how they're coming across. They underestimate their impact on others.
Right.
And so they're simply not attuned to responding adequately emotionally to the needs of people around them. So that's a great, again, shedding light on meeting that particular characteristic here. And I'm hearing grandiosity. So as a dominant personality trait, it sounds as though he certainly is feeling entitled. He feels as though the rules don't necessarily apply to him because he is exceptional in his worldview. The self-centeredness. Would you say he was condescending to others, belittling?
Many people thought so.
Okay.
Many people thought so. In 1932, at the height of the Depression, Herbert Hoover is still president. A group of World War One Army veterans, some of them men he had led in battle, come to Washington. They're asking for a bonus payment. This is a payment that the government would give them um, for their service. This has precedent historically in past military ventures of the United States. And MacArthur is tasked with getting rid of this, breaking up these protests. And in his mind, he justifies this, saying that, thinking it to himself, that these are communists, these are people trying to take over the Capitol, they're trying to start a rebellion, a revolution, and turn the country into a communist paradise. Remember, this is not long after the Russian Revolution.
Okay.
And so this kind of thinking is present. Uh, and he puts down this rebellion with great brutality. Fires are started in their encampments. There's nobody knows exactly how they got started. Uh, People are killed, and this is a bad thing. Um, and so later on, uh, a popular set of journalists write an article about this and accuse him of brutality, and he sues them for an exorbitant amount of money. And they find out about this case of his mistress that he had, who he has dispatched her back to Manila before that. And they tell him, drop the lawsuit and pay us off. And he does, just to keep this
Wow.
quiet.
Oh my gosh. So this reminds me, because this sounds very much attention seeking to me. It's my way or the highway. When we were at the memorial, they have this great video movie that you can go in and watch. And we were laughing at the end because it seemed like every scene getting to the end of this film, his trademark pipe, right? This pipe that he is, you see it in every photograph just about, along with the glasses. I was reading actually recently, I hadn't realized that Ray-Ban started a Douglas MacArthur line of sunglasses in the 80s based off of his trademark. Like the glasses and the pipe just got bigger and more obnoxious over the course of his life. So this attention seeking, this admiration seeking, that seems to be very much prevalent, and that's exactly what we're looking at with narcissism and the stability. So it seems as though these are some trademarks of his. These are some characteristics throughout his life. This makes sense because of his upbringing. Across situations, we're seeing it in his personal life. We're seeing it in his military service. And it's not necessarily something that we can explain because of a developmental period. So he's like this in his youth. He's this way in his older age, and it's not something that's necessarily just the singularity on a particular environment. So this is something we're seeing across environments. So I would say there's plenty of evidence that he certainly had a particular personality disorder of sorts, and narcissistic personality, perhaps even a touch of antisocial personality, with again just the lack of regard for others, the lack of empathy, feeling as though the rules didn't apply, maybe even a touch of that. But certainly, I would argue that he was a narcissist through and through.
Yeah, and so of course later in his career, he openly defies President Truman and is removed from command during the Korean War, and spends the rest of his life going around making speeches and justifying his
Right.
actions and things like that.
Right, trying to salvage
Well,
a little bit of his repertoire, right? So let's talk about MacArthur and food in the last few minutes that we have here. So I had asked you before, what did he like to eat? What was he known for eating? And I found this great quote: "Give me bullets or give me bread." What is this about?
Well, of course, as Napoleon said, an army marches on its stomach. So you need weapons and you need food. And food, food is a very important aspect of culture, as we talked about before. We've lost some of that, I think, in American culture. But when you ask someone to have a drink with you or to share a meal with you, you're you're it's a sign of vulnerability. That's why it's such an important thing. We don't think twice about it. Hey, let's go grab a pizza. Um, but in MacArthur's case, to him, he was very uncomfortable in these settings, these social settings. But he recognized he had to do it. So he did not ever want to be out of control. So no one ever accused him of being not even drunk, but not even tipsy. He would carry a drink around, but it was. You said earlier when we were talking before we started, it was a prop, and that's what it was. That's a great
It
way to
sounds like he
describe
was
it.
playing a role, and he
Yeah.
really wanted to embody to make it believable.
Yeah.
You know, yes, that he embodied in every way, shape, or form this illustrious, powerful leader.
Yeah. And he was temperate when he ate. Wasn't known as a big eater. So, eating for him, I think, was something he did as a human necessity, not as a
Okay.
social thing. As
It
you
wasn't a
mentioned,
passion
yeah,
for it. Yes.
you mentioned before, he showed some antisocial behavior, and I think this is an example of it. But he recognized that it was necessary to be social.
Right. And so, given how complex he is as an individual, do we think that some of those narcissistic qualities actually support? And so, in other words, that in some situations, some leaders may have to look at things in these ways to be successful.